The first-class cabin of Flight 908 smelled like leather seats, expensive perfume, and fresh coffee. Wealthy passengers settled into oversized chairs while soft jazz played through hidden speakers above the cabin. Then, everything changed the moment a skinny black teenager stepped into first class wearing faded jeans, worn-out sneakers, and a cheap gray hoodie with frayed sleeves. Conversation slowed. Eyes turned. A businessman near seat 2A lowered his newspaper and frowned. A woman in diamonds clutched her designer purse a little tighter. The boy walked quietly down the aisle holding a small duffel bag against his chest like he was afraid someone might take it away. He stopped beside seat 1C, looked down at the boarding pass in his trembling hand, and softly said, "Excuse me. I think this is my seat." The flight attendant standing nearby let out a short laugh before passengers could even react. Her name tag read Vanessa Reed, senior cabin crew. Tall, polished, perfect makeup. The kind of smile that looked friendly from far away, but cold up close. She stepped in front of the boy and looked him up and down slowly, like she was inspecting something dirty. "Sweetheart," she said loudly enough for the nearby rows to hear, "first class is for premium passengers." A few people chuckled quietly. The boy's face tightened, but he stayed calm. "Yes, ma'am," he replied politely. "This is my seat." Vanessa held out her hand impatiently. "Boarding pass." The boy handed it over. She scanned it once, then again, her eyebrows narrowing. Around them, passengers watched openly now, already deciding what kind of story this was. A rich man near the window muttered, "Kid probably walked on to the wrong plane." Another passenger whispered, "These scams happen all the time." The boy heard every word, but he said nothing. He simply stood there holding his duffel bag while the cabin filled with quiet judgment. Vanessa looked back at him and smiled again, but this time the smile carried cruelty. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Did someone help you sneak up here?" More laughter. The teenager lowered his eyes for a second, not from shame, but from exhaustion. He looked like someone who had spent his entire life being forced to prove he belonged in rooms where people decided he did not. His name was Elijah Carter, 16 years old, raised in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Baltimore. His mother, Renee Carter, worked double shifts cleaning office buildings downtown while fighting diabetes that worsened every year because she could never afford proper treatment. Elijah never knew his father. Whenever he asked about him as a child, his mother would only say one sentence before changing the subject. "Your father loved the sky." That was it. No pictures, no stories, no explanation. By 13, Elijah stopped asking. Their apartment sat above an old laundromat where the pipes rattled all night and winter cold slipped through cracks in the walls. Some nights, the power shut off for hours. Elijah studied beside candlelight while his mother slept on the couch after 16-hour shifts. Kids at school mocked his clothes, his shoes, the fact that he worked weekends stocking shelves at a grocery store instead of hanging out like other teenagers. But Elijah carried himself differently. Quiet, focused, calm beyond his years. Every afternoon after school, he rode 2 buses to the public library and spent hours reading books about aviation, business leaders, and airline history. While other boys memorized basketball statistics, Elijah memorized aircraft models and the stories of airline founders. The librarian once asked him why he loved planes so much, and Elijah answered with complete seriousness, "Because planes don't care where you come from. Once you're in the sky, everybody looks small." 3 weeks before this flight, everything changed. Elijah received an invitation to attend an elite aviation leadership academy in Seattle, a program so exclusive only 20 students in the country were selected each year. Full scholarship. Flight included. His mother cried for almost an hour after reading the letter. Before he left for the airport that morning, she hugged him tightly in their tiny kitchen and whispered something she had not said in years. "One day your last name is going to mean something, baby." Elijah did not understand what she meant, Neither did she explain. Now, standing inside first class while strangers stared at him like he was a criminal, those words echoed in his head again. Vanessa folded her arms. "I'm calling airport security," she announced. "Until then, you can wait at the back of the plane." Elijah swallowed slowly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I paid for nothing." "The Academy booked the ticket." "I'm sure they did," Vanessa replied with a sarcastic smile. A businessman nearby laughed openly this time. The humiliation spread through the cabin like heat. Elijah could feel dozens of eyes on him, judging him before they knew a single thing about him. Yet somehow he remained calm. That calmness irritated Vanessa even more. She snatched the boarding pass again and walked toward the front desk near the aircraft door, where an airport supervisor stood checking final passenger documents. "There's clearly been some mistake," she said sharply while handing over the ticket. "This boy is claiming seat 1C. The supervisor took the boarding pass absent-mindedly at first. Then his eyes stopped on the screen. His expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face. He looked down at the boy standing alone in the aisle. Then back at the computer. Then at the last name printed on the ticket. Carter. For 2 full seconds, the man forgot how to breathe. Suddenly he grabbed the phone beside the cabin door with shaking hands and said in a nervous voice, "Sir, you need to come here immediately." "He's here." Vanessa Reed frowned in confusion as the airport supervisor continued staring at the computer screen like he had just seen a ghost. The noise inside the cabin slowly faded beneath a heavy silence spreading row by row. Even the passengers who had been laughing moments earlier stopped talking. The supervisor swallowed hard, loosened his tie with trembling fingers, and looked again at Elijah standing quietly beside seat 1C with his old duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. It made no sense. The worn hoodie. The second-hand shoes. The shy 16-year-old boy standing alone in first class. None of it matched the information glowing on the screen in front of him. Vanessa crossed her arms impatiently. She snapped, "I told you something was wrong." But the supervisor did not answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on one line only. Passenger name, Elijah Carter. Priority status, founding family clearance. The man's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. He looked at Elijah again, this time not with suspicion, but disbelief. "Sir," he whispered carefully, almost respectfully, "could you please come with me for a moment?" The entire tone of his voice had changed. Passengers noticed it instantly. Vanessa noticed it too. Her confidence cracked slightly. Elijah hesitated before following the supervisor toward the front galley near the aircraft entrance. He could feel the eyes of the entire cabin tracking his every step. The businessman who had mocked him lowered his gaze. The woman with the diamonds looked suddenly uncomfortable. Vanessa followed behind them, irritated and confused. "What is going on?" she demanded. The supervisor ignored her. He looked directly at Elijah and asked softly, "Your mother's name, is it Renee Carter?" Elijah blinked in surprise. "Yes." The supervisor inhaled sharply. For a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then he said something that made Elijah's stomach tighten. "Your father was Jonathan Carter?" Elijah stared at him. That name hit like thunder. He had heard it only once in his life. 2 years ago, during one of his mother's fever episodes, she whispered the name in her sleep before crying quietly in the dark. But whenever Elijah asked about it later, she refused to answer. I think so," Elijah admitted slowly. The supervisor closed his eyes for a second, as if trying to process what he was seeing. Then he stepped aside and motioned toward the aircraft door, where 3 senior airport executives were suddenly hurrying down the jet bridge with visible panic on their faces. One of them, a silver-haired man in an expensive Navy suit, pushed past 2 ground crew workers without even acknowledging them. The second he entered the cabin, every employee straightened immediately. Even Vanessa froze. The man was Richard Hale, executive director of Atlantic Crown Airways, one of the most powerful figures in American aviation. People moved out of his way instinctively. Richard Hale stopped the moment he saw Elijah. The color vanished from his face. His eyes locked onto the teenager's features like he was staring into the past itself. "Oh my God," he whispered. The entire cabin had gone silent now. Not one passenger spoke. Richard Hale slowly walked toward Elijah, his breathing uneven. "You have his eyes," he said softly. Exactly his eyes. Elijah stood frozen, confusion twisting inside his chest. "Sir, what's happening?" Richard looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Jonathan Carter wasn't just your father, son." His voice cracked slightly. "He founded this airline." A ripple of shock spread through the cabin. Vanessa's mouth fell open. The businessman near the window turned completely pale. Elijah stared at Richard as if the words could not possibly be real. Founded the airline? That was impossible. His mother cleaned office buildings at night. They lived above a laundromat. Some weeks they barely had enough money for groceries. Richard seemed to understand the storm inside Elijah's mind because his expression filled with sadness. "Your father disappeared 16 years ago during a private humanitarian flight over the Atlantic," he explained quietly. The crash was never fully understood. After his death, there was a legal war over the company. "Your mother vanished before anyone could reach her. We searched for both of you for years." Elijah's throat tightened. His entire childhood suddenly felt unstable, like pieces of a story he never knew were being rearranged in front of him. "My mother never told me any of this," he whispered. Richard nodded slowly. "She was protecting you." Vanessa took a small step backward, her hands trembling now. Less than 20 minutes ago, she had treated this boy like garbage in front of an entire cabin, accused him of sneaking into first class, threatened to remove him from the plane. And now, the most powerful executive in the airline industry was standing in front of him like he was family royalty. Richard reached into his jacket pocket carefully and removed an old silver photograph folded from years of wear. He handed it to Elijah. Elijah looked down at the picture and felt the air leave his lungs. It showed a smiling man standing beside a private jet with one arm around a young woman Elijah instantly recognized as his mother. The man's eyes were identical to his own. On the back of the photograph were 5 handwritten words. "For our son someday. Dad." Elijah's hand started shaking. For 16 years he had believed he came from nothing, that he was invisible. Forgotten. Just another poor black kid trying to survive. But standing inside that first-class cabin, while every passenger watched in stunned silence, Elijah realized something life-changing. His mother had not hidden his father because he was worthless. She had hidden him because his name was powerful enough to change everything. Nobody in the first-class cabin moved. The silence felt heavier than the roar of the aircraft engines outside. Elijah stood there holding the old photograph in trembling hands while emotions crashed through him too fast to understand. Across from him, Vanessa Reed looked completely shattered. The same woman who had mocked him minutes earlier now could not even meet his eyes. Her perfect posture was gone. Her hands shook uncontrollably at her sides, and the confidence that once filled her voice had disappeared completely. Around the cabin, passengers stared at Elijah with a different kind of expression now. Not suspicion, not judgment, shame. The businessman who laughed at him earlier slowly removed his glasses and looked down at the floor. The woman with the diamond earrings gripped her purse silently, unable to look toward Elijah after the things she had whispered about him. Richard Hale placed a gentle hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Your father built this airline believing people should be treated with dignity no matter where they came from," he said quietly. That was the entire foundation of Atlantic Crown Airways. Elijah lowered his eyes toward the photograph again. For years he had watched his mother struggle through pain, exhaustion, and poverty without ever understanding the truth she carried alone. Every night she came home exhausted from cleaning buildings. Every sacrifice, every silent tear suddenly meant something different now. She had not been hiding weakness. She had been protecting him from a world powerful enough to destroy families over money and control. Vanessa finally stepped forward, her voice breaking before the words fully came out. "Elijah, I'm so sorry." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "I judged you before I knew anything about you." Her breathing shook badly now. "I treated you like you didn't belong here." Elijah looked at her quietly. He had every reason to humiliate her in front of everyone the same way she humiliated him. Every passenger expected anger, expected revenge. But Elijah simply folded the photograph carefully and placed it back into his pocket. Then he said softly, "My mother taught me that the way people see you says more about them than it does about you." Vanessa covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. Several passengers lowered their heads in embarrassment. Elijah picked up his duffel bag and finally sat down in seat 1C. This time, nobody questioned whether he belonged there. Minutes later, the aircraft doors closed, but the atmosphere inside the cabin had completely changed. Flight attendants suddenly addressed him with nervous respect. Passengers smiled awkwardly whenever he looked their way. Yet Elijah remained the same quiet boy who boarded the plane wearing second-hand shoes and carrying everything he owned inside one small bag. During the flight, Richard Hale sat beside him and told him stories about his father for nearly 2 hours. Stories about a brilliant pilot who believed aviation should connect people instead of separating them by wealth or status. Stories about a man who never forgot where he came from, despite becoming one of the youngest airline founders in history. Elijah listened silently while staring out the window at the clouds drifting beneath the aircraft. For the first time in his life, he felt like the sky belonged to him, too. By the next morning, the story had exploded across social media. A passenger had secretly recorded the confrontation inside first class. Millions watched the video of the flight attendant mocking a poor black teenager before discovering he was the missing heir to one of America's largest airlines. News channels replayed the footage for days. But strangely, the moment people shared most was not the humiliation. It was Elijah's response. His calmness. His forgiveness. His dignity. Reporters later asked him during an interview if he hated the people who judged him that day. Elijah thought quietly for a moment before answering with words that spread across the internet within hours. "Some people only recognize your value after learning your last name," he said. "But real character means treating people with respect before you know who they are." Those words changed lives. Schools discussed them. Churches quoted them. Parents repeated them to their children. And somewhere in a small apartment above an old laundromat in Baltimore, Elijah's mother watched the interview with tears streaming down her face because her son had become exactly the kind of man she prayed he would be. The world looked at his clothes and saw poverty. They looked at his skin and saw assumptions. But greatness does not always arrive wearing expensive suits. Sometimes greatness boards first class carrying a worn-out duffel bag and a last name powerful enough to silence an entire airport. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever been judged before someone truly knew you? And subscribe for more powerful stories that prove greatness can come from anywhere.